Hi, everybody, recording in progress. I will officially introduce myself. I'm Claire Wasserman. I am the founder and author. You can tell we've got some books in the background of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform and global community that is all about helping women level up professionally, financially. I mean, really, it's about leveling up in life, right? It's about taking command. Women's Equality Day. I've been saying Happy Women's Equality Day, which seems sort of odd because we're celebrating our rights as no longer second-class citizens. So let me go on a little tangent for a second here. Women's Equality Day. Okay, so this infers that we were not equal, which, you know what, I'm saying that in the past, but I think a lot of you who are watching this, who showed up today, there might be something in your life that doesn't quite feel right, and it's not you. It's not you. I mean, listen, my mom was the second or third class of women in her college. She's not that old. I'm not that old. Okay. So this is pretty recent. I think for us, I just want to take a minute and what does equality feel like to you, right? Like when you close your eyes and you think about Women's Equality Day, right? What comes to mind for you and very personally to you? So I'm not talking about like the wider statistics, which we all know are not great when it comes to women and the wage gap, the leadership gap, the funding gap, the investment gap. You've come to these things before, you know that I always start in like a very low, depressing place. So I don't apologize for that because we need to have some context to why this is very, very, very important that we're here. It's not just to network and have fun, although that should absolutely be part of this. Listen, for me, and I think for many of you, Women's Equality Day, the reason you showed up today is because you give a shit about your life. You are not going to accept what has just been given to you, right? The circumstances that you have now. It doesn't matter if it's frustrating. You want to see a change, right? In some way. You are here because you want to improve in some way. And whether that's you wanting to make a change in the, in how you operate, or you want to make a change in the where you operate, right? In the environment that you're in. This is what today is about. And it's not that we're just lucky, right? I really, really believe that you are the master. And when I say master, I mean mistress of your own fate. And I think part of this is really allowing yourself to be freaking proud of yourself, because we just got a big setback this year with COVID, right? And the pandemic. And you've seen those statistics around women and especially mothers. I don't need to go into it because I'm already feeling like we're starting this in a bit of a downer. We don't want that. So I just think the fact that we're here, that we've survived, let alone, I mean, if we're thriving, great. But the fact that you just were able to press sign up on this event and you could show up and you can watch this. I mean, this is a time to be proud of yourself. And part of that is, I know we keep moving the goalposts of success, right? How we define it, how we measure it. And at least for me, right? I constantly want to self-improve and make our business bigger and better. But I just don't want us to forget that we are doing good work today, and we did it yesterday. And so to just continually remind ourselves, like, good fucking job for being here. I like to curse. I'm very passionate about what I do. And so that just has to be part of all of this calculus of wanting to do better, wanting to go above and beyond. We just cannot berate ourselves when there are setbacks or when things are tiring, and they are very, very tiring. And part of what we do, I'm a little conflicted about, just to be very transparent with you, because at Ladies Get Paid, our primary focus is to give you all the tools to self-advocate financially, professionally, et cetera, right? But we are the ones who still suffer from discrimination. And so why should it be on us to have to work so damn hard, right? Women's Equality Day. So I do want to always acknowledge, like, yes, we are doing our damn best to move forward and be better and do better, but also just good job us, good job us. So very quickly before we officially get started, I do want to read, and this might be a little bit corny, but it is Women's Equality Day. I do want to read the statement that was made, the observance of Women's Equality Day, which commemorates the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Thank you, Susan B. Anthony, and many other women in the National Suffrage Association. It was first proposed to the U.S. Constitution in 1878. It took to 1920 to get the 19th Amendment passed. And then it wasn't until 1971 that we had legislation that called for an official Women's Equality Day. I do think it's really important to have a memory, a day that commemorates that it was not always so. And also to remind us that we need to keep going. So here was what was introduced in 1971. So I'm going to read it aloud to you all. And whereas the women of the United States have been treated as second-class citizens and have not been entitled the full rights and privileges, public or private, legal or institutional, which are available to male citizens of the United States, and I want to make an amendment to that, white male citizens. And whereas the women of the United States have united to assure that these rights and privileges are available to all citizens, regardless of sex and race, and I keep interjecting. And whereas the women of the United States have designated August 26th, the anniversary date of the certification of the 19th Amendment as symbol of the continued fight for equal rights. And whereas the women of the United States are to be commended and supported in their organizations and activities. Now, therefore, be it resolved, dramatic, the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled that August 26th of each year is designated as Women's Equality Day, and the president is authorized and requested to issue a proclamation annually in commemoration of that day in 1920, on which the women of America were first given the right to vote, and that day in 1970, of which a nationwide demonstration for women's rights took place. And I think you heard me throughout. I got chills. Ooh. I think you heard me throughout. I always interjected with race. It is not the same. I think many of you know that who are watching this. And if you don't, ooh, you are in for a great awakening of any time that we think as white women that we have progressed. We may have, but I really, and you've heard me say this before, I really think we've only progressed as far as those who are still struggling the most among us. And those are Black and brown women. Those are hourly workers. They're in retail. They're in caregiving. They're in the front lines. And they are not given the social safety net that we all are, but we need even more of. I'm not running for office right now, okay? So, but that sounded like that speech because again, we need that type of urgency to show up in our lives, and it can be in small ways, but we have to show up for each other. The last thing I just want to quickly mention is that there are 10-minute breaks in between each session. If you want to go ahead and check the Eventbrite, let me just drop it in the chat real quickly. That's where you can see the times that things will begin. You'll notice that I have them to the absolute minute. I don't know if we're going to be able to stick with that. So we'll do our best, but yes, 10-minute break for all of us to get up and go to the bathroom, especially if you are drinking a big ass water bottle like I am. Awesome. Okay, so welcome. I get behind that ticket. And I see Faith. I'm going to go ahead and let me just make sure that everybody is muted, which I know is, there's always a baby and a dog in the background, as much as I love babies and dogs, which by the way, I think it's National Dog Day on Women's Equality Day. I don't know how I feel about that. So there you go. Though I do love dogs. Faith, my love, I am going to go ahead and unmute you. And then I'm going to go ahead. So I've asked you to unmute. If you want to do that, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you as well. And then we're going to do Dan Spaulding. If you want to just, oh, he's there too, and he's got a headset. Love it. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to unmute as well. I'm going to add a pin. There we go. There's Dan. Faith, why don't you go ahead? There you go. I see you. Technology. Yes. Did we do it? And we're on time. Make some noise for me. So I hear you, Faith. Dan,
yes.
Yes. You're getting adjusted. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. Yes. Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody. This is our first session of the day, and I can think of no better panelists to welcome to the stage, the virtual stage. And by the way, we are going to go, this conversation is going to last up until about 1:55, and I'm still going to use Eastern time for you all. So you'll have to recalculate wherever you are. And the reason that we're kicking off today with this panel, this is actually kind of the all-encompassing panel. The intention of today is really to get an understanding of how companies are trying to figure out what the heck is going on post-COVID, although I don't know how much post we are. There are so many things that are changing behind the scenes. And I think for all of us to be really the best advocates for ourselves and other people is to get a sense of how companies are thinking about the changes. And I've touched base with Dan and Faith beforehand, and they've have agreed to be quite transparent about how they're figuring things out. So just quickly, Dan Spaulding is the Chief People Officer at Zillow, which is the leading real estate marketplace. And in his capacity as CPO, Dan leads the company's people operations, including human resources, recruiting, equity and belonging, learning and development, organizational and talent strategy, and workplace experience. Now you understand why we're beginning with this panel, because Dan does everything. And then prior to joining Zillow Group, Dan was vice president of the US stores and operations and human resources, again, everything, for Starbucks, where his team drove support and strategy for over 8,000 stores and 140,000 employees nationwide. Faith Geiger, we're going to welcome her as well. She's a human potentialist. We're going to talk to her what that means. And founder of TULLA, an integrative advising, coaching, and training company that, quote, exists to liberate and empower the human spirit, starting in the workplace. She advises and coaches leaders in areas of workplace culture and the employee experience, and supports strategic initiatives in the areas of human development and performance management. She's also training to become a workplace therapist. So welcome to both of you. I'm going to just kick it off real quick with Faith, because what is a human potentialist and what is a workplace therapist? And can you give us a little bit of therapy?
Yes, this is therapy for me too, by the way. I've been reading the chats and I'm just delighted and honored to be here with everybody and glad we could be in the same virtual room together. So your question, I'll start with a workplace therapist. And the best way to explain a workplace therapist is to tell you what a therapist is in general. And I know we probably all know what a therapist does and who they are, but a therapist essentially is someone skilled in a certain type of therapy. But the type of therapist I'm talking about is a licensed mental health professional who specializes in helping people develop better cognitive and emotional skills, improve their mental health condition, and provide the tools to build healthy coping skills. So that's a therapist. A workplace therapist is all of that and works inside of an organization. And I'm usually an extension of the HR team or the leadership team. So workplace therapists take their skills, their specialized skills, insert it into an organization, and they become a workplace therapist. And our goal as a workplace therapist, or my goal as a future workplace therapist, is to continue to provide the tools so people and profit can flourish together. Mm-hmm. And then a human potentialist. Do you want me to say that too? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to call out really quickly that people and profit do not need to be at odds with each other.
That's right.
Sometimes it can feel like that, especially women in our community say, can I trust HR? Like, whose side are they on? So I did want to just call that out for a second.
Yes.
But continue. Human potentialist. Tell us.
They don't have to be competing forces. That's right. So a human potentialist, I'm sure many of you know, human potential is our innate capacity to grow, to develop over time, over our lifespan. It's a very simple definition. My definition of a human potentialist is someone who deeply understands human potential, what it is, and specializes in guiding people in cultivating their innate potentialities, biologically, psychologically, philosophically, in all of the dimensions. We offer tools, resources, and training to unlock one's potential. And our first mission is always to remind people, and Claire, I love that you say self-advocate, because my goal and our goal is to always remind people you're your own best advocate and healer. And I'm here as a guide to support you in identifying and cultivating your potential. So that is a human potentialist, and we help people in their guide or in their journey to self-actualization.
And by the way, everybody here, use the chat, ask questions. Of course, I've prepared my own, but we're here to serve you. Dan, I want you to comment on the point I made a little bit earlier, right? Of like, why does HR sometimes feel like it's against us, right? And the tension between, profit and people, if there is one. I'm just sort of going off of, when the community comes to me and asks me how to work with HR, and it can feel confrontational. I hope that it doesn't have to be that way. Is this something you've heard of, dealt with, thought about?
Oh, absolutely. And first, Claire, thanks for thinking of me. Thanks for thinking of Zillow. I'm super excited to be here today and just talk about obviously where this world is going. And just for reference, my pronouns are he, him, his. I mean, your question is a great one. There has always been, I think, to some degree, a trust gap that employees often feel with HR, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. I think HR has not always championed the needs of employees, and that is real in a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations have not always invested in quality HR and in really caring for their employees. And I think a lot of that was exposed for a lot of companies during COVID. And I've been so fortunate in my career to work for companies that recognize that the success of the business starts with the success of its employees. And what I would say as an HR practitioner is it is important to always understand that great HR is built on this concept of balanced support, that you have to have a balance between the interests of the enterprise and the shareholders, the interests of management, and the interest of employees. And you can't just optimize for one dimension of that if you're going to have a successful, what we at Zillow like to call a sustainable culture. And so that's what great HR teams do. I would say sometimes it feels contentious with HR as an individual employee, because often people are only interested in one answer, which is what they want. And, businesses are big and complex, and there's implications of every decision that business leaders make. And sometimes the answer you want isn't the answer that the organization can provide. And so, again, great HR teams help to try to find, appropriate compromises, pathways for support, all of the things that lead to a healthy and sustainable culture. But, it's complicated. It's like every other relationship in our lives. Everybody sometimes just wants what they want. And the art of, to me, great businesses are, how do you find that common ground, and how do you move the collective forward?
So essentially you are a diplomat in a way, mediator.
You have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be.
And then quick question from Rebecca, and this is why I love you all submitting questions. Rebecca asks, why are HR folks often so afraid of, quote, transparency? And this may not be something you've dealt with, so feel free to pass on this question. And she says, related to pay transparency, specific efforts or strategy related to DEI or recruitment. Is this generally a fear of giving up power? Interesting, Rebecca, that's your interpretation. What do you think, Dan?
I don't think it's a fear of giving up power. I think all of those three things that you listed are super complex and nuanced conversations. And so what often happens when people say the word transparency is they want one piece of data, but sometimes that piece of data has to be contextualized with a whole number of pieces of data. And pay is often one of those areas that is the most complicated. Is, I think most people agree, hey, if you're being systemically underpaid because of your gender or ethnicity, that's bad. I don't think most people would argue the point, though, if you're more qualified than your counterpart, you should be paid more. So when you have that conversation, people want the transparency, but only if that transparency necessarily maybe substantiates their perspective on that transparency. And so, for example, we do pay equity analysis twice a year at Zillow that looks at the pay of people in comparable jobs to make sure that there isn't a gender or ethnicity based difference in pay. But there are places where there is a performance difference in pay. where there is an experience difference in pay. And that's why actually a couple of years ago, between men and women in comparable jobs at Zillow, women were paid $1 and I think a cent more than men. And this became a little bit of a media thing for us of, oh, well, that's reverse discrimination. And so you get caught in this conversation of, no, it just means in some places that we had more experienced women than their male counterparts who were making more money. Those narratives get very lost in a social media age, and so that's where HR departments struggle. I think sometimes when people say, "Hey, I want this information. I want to have the conversation," as opposed to help me understand your practices. And I think if you're ever struggling to feel like you're having trouble understanding what your company is doing or why they're doing it, ask about maybe the practices as opposed to simply the data. That's usually a safer way to maybe jump into the conversation where people can highlight, hey, here's what we are doing about whatever topic you want to talk about. And then that usually leads to maybe a more nuanced conversation on the data.
Yes, and I think that does speak to your point, Rebecca, of even just using the word transparency, right? It's not just like, what is the pay, but how did we get there? I am going to keep asking you, Dan, a question. That doesn't mean I'm not going to get to you, Faith, but talking about pay and it being contextual leads in really, really well to this discussion that a lot of tech companies are having, Facebook, that they will change your pay if you move to a lower cost of living city, right? So if you were in San Francisco, you were paid a certain amount because it's very high cost of living. And again, compensation is contextual. Then let's say you moved, which a lot of people did during the pandemic, your pay would be commensurate with that cost of living. So then your pay would go down. I know for Zillow and Reddit, which is interesting because we're going to have a senior recruiter from Reddit on later, you chose not to do that. You're a big company also. So what was the deciding fact? Like, was this something you went back and forth on? Was it a clear decision? And then I know this is a decision that you will reevaluate, which is why I'm glad we have these conversations because this stuff is fluid. Tell me a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, we made the decision very early on in COVID, and by early on, I would say, last summer, that we weren't going to go back to our old sort of work, our office-centric culture. We saw both in our business and then with our employees, this huge desire for people to move and to be somewhere different and reshuffling their priorities in life. We've deemed it the great reshuffling on so many levels. And once we made the decision that we were going to give our employees the ability to work flexibly, and for many of our employees to work completely remotely, permanently, the next question is, what do you do about pay? And it's this huge conundrum. And so we created clarity last year on, hey, for 2021, if you move, we're not going to drop your pay. And then we really started this year on what's the right long-term approach. And like a lot of companies, we used to take a city-centric approach to pay because we had our offices in 11 cities around, across the US. And once we made the decision to allow employees to live wherever they wanted, we quickly went from having employees in 24 states to having employees in 49 states. And you very quickly get to a conversation of, you're now a national employer, and you have to both look locally and nationally at pay. So we've been going through a process of moving away from a city-centric model to more of a national model that lets us look locally and nationally at pay. And what does that mean? And with a lot of conversations around pay, I think things get overly simplified. Does that mean that we're going to pay everybody across the United States the same price for a job that you would pay in the heart of San Francisco? Maybe eventually, but for right now, we need to recognize that if somebody moves from San Francisco to another place in the U.S., it didn't feel right to us to suddenly drop their pay. doing the same work. They're adding the same, they're adding the same value, hopefully. And so what we're trying to do is just shift the focus from where you live determines your pay to looking nationally first, recognizing there are some incredibly expensive parts of the country to live in, and we're going to need to be competitive locally there. But also recognizing that for the vast majority of our employees, that we should be looking at a national scale for pay, not just saying, hey, you live in X place and that looks like a lower cost of living, so we're just going to default to paying you less. And for our current employees that are spread out, we are not capping what your pay can grow to. So for our best performers, they should be as competitive to a national market and those big coastal expensive cities as employees that are living in those locations. So I'm always very careful to say, we're not saying that location will never play a factor in pay. But what we're saying is what you produce, the scope of your job, the experience that you bring, those factors will lead, and where you live will come second. And if your family makes the decision to move for a variety of reasons, we're not going to drop your pay simply because you make that decision.
Mm-hmm. That's hopefully helpful. Again, it's complicated, everybody. There's so many moving pieces in this. Faith, I'm going to bring you into the conversation. I know this is a bit of a broad question, but how things have changed over the last year, has that impacted the kind of work you do, or has it just demonstrated that we definitely need more of what you do?
Both. Both. And I will say that the demonstration of more of a need is obvious. We have systems and structures that are changing rapidly right before our eyes, both on all dimensions. So of course the work is amplified and even more needed. So to all the therapists and psychologists and trainers and psychotherapists on this call, I love you. And then my work, I spent a lot of time with HR leaders figuring out the most loving and kind way to get through the pandemic, and we're still in it. But how do we respond to the emerging needs of our team members? How do we take the best course of action that is in the best interest of all stakeholders? That's how it changed. My focus redirected from strategy to, we have to handle a crisis and respond to the emerging needs of people. And how are we going to do it in the most loving way so we don't deeply hurt or traumatize people even further?
Mm-hmm. You talked about stakeholders. That was a question that somebody asked earlier. How do you get buy-in from stakeholders if you're somebody who is not trained?
Yeah.
I mean, for you, when you're brought in, clearly the company has committed to this kind of work, and they know that it's important. Do you have any suggestions for folks who maybe, whether they have, power or not at the company, somebody who maybe is junior? How do you demonstrate the need for this and sort of the next steps?
I would make a case for their leader on why this work is important and the improvements and the impact it will have on the organization and the people and the processes. So it's really advocating and explaining as to the best of your ability, why you think this work is important, and educating your environment. I mean, we're in a time where we need so much education and we need to unlearn a lot. And so in order to continue to progress into a better future, a more loving future, you can't demand or come at people with this. Intensity is great and passion. Trust me, I love it. And I'm all there a little too much sometimes. But if it's coming from the place of, this is how we can make it better. And I don't know exactly, I don't know all of the outcomes, but I know that this work could really be meaningful to the company, and we can continue to attract great talent, and our people will flourish, and you don't worry, we'll still make a great profit, and making a business case. Mm-hmm. And I'm here to help. If anybody needs that direction, I'm here to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the end of the day, this is always about the bottom line, really. But people, your company is only as good as the people who work with you. For you.
That's right. They don't have to compete. They don't. Right. They do not have to compete. They can be best friends.
Yes. And I know, kind of in the therapy realm, right? Mental health. I know that's something you've talked a lot about.
Yeah.
big conversation with remote work, burnout, Zoom fatigue, et cetera. What did you do this year to help companies work through that? And again, just suggestions for all of us about how maybe we can figure out our Zoom fatigue and et cetera.
Well, there's a lot of really great, so I'm a total nerd and I love research. So there's a lot of great research coming out from really cool social psychologists and that talk about Zoom fatigue, that give really great tips that are evidence-based and research informed. My work, really interestingly enough, all of my clients had to be, I worked with hospitality. So I was working with a massive autograph collection hotel in Fort Worth. And then I was working with a commercial real estate firm, and I was working in industries or with clients that really couldn't go virtual too much. So what we did for anybody who could go virtual and still continue to move the business forward as much as possible, I just remained available with my team for conversations and breakdowns and, oh my God, what am I doing? And how do I get through this? And bringing people a little bit of light and positivity and tools, like, here's what you can do to work through this. Here's what you can do to support, to practice self-care when you're feeling fatigued. Here's what you can do to check in emotionally before you get on a call. And we just provided tools, and we created a safe container for people to just be vulnerable.
I've read that you said that companies, the workplace should deliberately become a protective factor in one's life. And you also said companies have a massive opportunity. Okay, so I'm glad we're feeling positive here. Massive opportunity and, quite frankly, an obligation to help shape, nurture, and support whole person well-being. So how do you do that? And giving some like really practical tips, I think would be helpful, both for those who are in leadership positions, who can contribute to the sort of protective factor, and then those who are maybe a little bit more middle management and below, of how we can, bottom up, have influence.
Yes. My best friend called me, Cami did, and she said, please give really tangible tips. Sometimes you go really you start talking about all these big concepts, and please give practical tips. So thank you for the reminder. Protective factors. We have risk factors in life and protective factors, and they start very early on in childhood and adolescence. And I won't go into detail about what they are, but work is not listed as a protective factor. So we don't study this. It's not in HR curriculum. It's not in social science curriculum. Not all of them. I could be totally wrong. So call me out if that's different, but work is not listed as a protective factor. And gosh, if you just think about the profound impact work has on our lives and who we become, you really start to, you take a step back and say, I really do have to be a steward of human development. It's not only my work to create a very successful organization that has impact on everybody, but I am a steward of human development in the workplace. People spend, I get so revved up about this, but there are major developmental stages of our life that we're spending in the workplace. Most of our life is spent in the workplace. I mean, we're working. Two of the most important stages that are the outcomes of two very important developmental stages. One is safe relationships filled with love. Hello, that's in our 18 to 40 years old. We're in the workplace. How do we teach that in the workplace? And then 40s to 60s, the desired outcome for that developmental phase is family, community, and to succeed at work. We have a massive opportunity to really take advantage of those developmental phases. So, okay, here's the practical part. First, just have an awareness, an appreciation. Are we aware that we have this profound, meaningful impact on human development? Yes. Okay. Let that sink in. All leaders at all levels, you are shaping people's lives. That's a big job. So once you have an awareness and an appreciation, I would evaluate all company policies. So work with a leader who understands or can advocate or influence, understanding, to Dan's point, really just ask the right questions, understand, be curious and understand how the policies that are implemented in the organization, how they have an impact on everybody. I would definitely encourage leaders to invite other perspectives, invite a social worker to come and evaluate your policies and how they impact the feeling of empowerment and liberation in humans. Invite a psychologist to understand how this type of work environment impacts our biological and mental health. Invite other perspectives, evaluate and create an assessment around identifying how your policies impact your company and your people. And then third, after you're assessing and evaluating, take action and make sure your team, even if the action is, guys were listening, gals were listening, humans were listening, yes, but take action. And it starts just one little foot in front of the other. It doesn't have to be massive change right away, but take action. So evaluate, assess, invite other perspectives, and then just decide how you move forward and take action.
I love it. Myra, probably butchering your name, but I'm going to give you a shout out. You have a question that is so perfect for Dan. What are you seeing in trends for HR in regards to, quote, the great resignation, which, by the way, we have a panel later on called Ladies Get Hired with somebody who is literally going to speak exactly to the great resignation. So we don't need to go too far into that, Dan. But what I love about this question that's so perfect for you is you said, okay, so the pandemic toll on women who had to quit their jobs because of the family, are they being more open? Are companies being more open to the idea of being flexible for the roles they need to fill in terms of the candidates they're willing to meet with? I know you've seen a difference in people who've applied for jobs for you, Dan. So curious if you want to talk a little bit about sort of hiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be perfectly honest. I don't even think we've started with the Great Resignation yet. I think, and I actually don't think until we emerge from COVID limbo that we'll really start to see how this plays out. I think there has been a lot of resignation across most companies this year for a couple of reasons. The first is, you had about a year where people hunkered down in place because, people were very scared about what happens to their lives and their jobs, particularly in 2020 in the darkness that we were, that if you were lucky enough to hold on to your job, you certainly weren't walking away from it with a lack of clarity. I think we started to really see some momentum this summer for two reasons. One, the world started to feel a lot better. May and June started to feel like, oh, we got COVID in check. We're getting our vaccines. Life's getting back to normal. And everything's going to be, everything's going to be great. And then, I think there was a lot of resentment towards the burnout, the Zoom school, the companies that maybe took a little advantage of people. And so I think you started to see some real movement in the summer. And then I would add there are the companies like Zillow that have also said, hey, we're working remote for the rest of time. So come on over if you don't want to go back to an office. What I have seen in our candidate applications have increased by about 35% this year. Since we had announced last year we were going permanently remote for many and most of our jobs. Now, I think the more that reopening of offices and things keep getting pushed out, the more that we're not really yet seeing people make decisions based on, their office culture or their office environment, until people are really back into a rhythm of making a decision. Do I have to commute every day? Do I have power over my schedule? Do my kids go back to school? I think I have a parent of a sophomore in high school. I think we all are holding our breath right now on school. And but I think when we get hopefully past the next wave of the pandemic, when we get into the early part of next year, that's when the proof's really going to be in the pudding around what do companies do to allow for the flexibility that by the beginning of next year, we will have been working for 2 years like this. So people are gonna need a level of flexibility, and we're gonna see the workplaces that allow that flexibility and don't. Then I think we're gonna see the great resignation. But the HR professional in me would say right now, we're just seeing pent up demand in people changing jobs. I think until we get back to some semblance of normality and we see how companies respond to the back to work, back to the office mentality, then I think we'll get into the great resignation.
So when you said 2 years, if anybody was looking at me when he said that, I like literally almost fell off my chair. Time, wow, I thought it was a year. Something you said to me when we spoke earlier that I thought was really, really interesting. This is in relation to remote work, which I know we keep talking about remote work, but I think what we're really talking about now is just work. If this is what it's going to be for the foreseeable future, in some form or another, you said, I will trade some of the things we're going to lose for the things we're gaining. You said that Zoom is sort of democratic, and that there's, quote, there's no more, who is that person in a meeting? I thought this was such an interesting quote. So, do you remember me saying that? Did I get the quote right? I do. Okay. Yeah. Expand a little bit on that.
I do. One of the things that we learned very quickly as a company shifting to home, and I live here in Seattle. Shout out to the Pacific Northwest, and we were one of the first communities that really went into working from home. It was early March of 2020, and we very quickly saw like, oh my gosh, the dynamics in our company changed when everybody had their own little box on Zoom, when you saw the name of the person that was there, when everything about a meeting wasn't oriented to the person sitting at the head of the table, and all of the loaded things about the politics of the room. And then when we started to really make the decision that we were going to go remote, and in full disclosure, we had been a company that was headquartered in Seattle, but had offices across the country. And one of the most persistent pieces of feedback were, if you're not in Seattle, you can't advance. If you're not in Seattle, you can't get what you need for your project. And we very quickly came to the realization that the goal of what we call Cloud HQ, that our headquarters is now in the cloud, is we want to remove the politics of location from having this oversized impact on people's career, meaning that you can't change jobs because you live in New York and the job is in Atlanta, or that if you're if you're working from home in Nashville, that you can't have as rich of insights as people who are sitting in the room in San Francisco. And that's one of the things that we're actively, as we go into this experiment, trying to adjust for. I'll give you a tangible example of what that means. When we do reopen our offices and get back to gathering, we're making a very intentional decision that if it's a standing meeting, our meetings are going to continue as one Zoom, all Zoom. So if one person is on that meeting from their home on Zoom, even if everybody's in the office, they're not going to get in one conference room where the audio and the visual is poor. Everybody's going to get on headphones, get on their computer, and have their own little box. So you can focus on the quality of the conversation and including everybody, as opposed to, well, we're all in the room and you're sitting in Chicago, and that's the way, because we've all been there. We've all been on these calls where you're like, I can't hear you. Can somebody turn the phone up? Or probably like a lot of you are reacting to my voice, like, oh my gosh, he's yelling at the audio. I apologize. I know I'm really loud. I come from a big family, and if you weren't loud, you didn't get heard. But then we're also making the decision that
So ironically, Dan, when you said people having trouble hearing, now you're
come together, and even though we're here we go, we're back. The last thing I would say is the other side of the one Zoom, all Zoom is when we bring people together intentionally, because human connection, bonding, that really matters to people. That's also going to be fully in person.
Oh man, internet. It is pretty ironic that this was exactly making the point. Okay, so Dan jumped off. I'm assuming he's going to come back on. There was a question that was asked that was fantastic. Ishra, also probably mispronouncing your name, but I want to give you a shout out. I'm going to wait to ask that question when Dan comes back, although of course, if he can't, we're going to talk about it, Faith. In terms of, just company culture in general, and our ability to contribute to company culture. Maybe just talk about for you what you've seen this year. If you have suggestions for other folks, just again, I just think your role is so needed in making sure that people feel okay. Oh, you're on mute. That's weird. Asked to unmute. So yeah. So in terms of, being able to self-advocate in a way that's could be hard because not everybody, is as good as Zillow with the one Zoom, all Zoom, which I thought was fantastic.
That's amazing. And Dan is
So
back.
yeah, yes,
But
Dan,
I would
so go ahead and
jump in,
unmute them.
please.
But yeah, if you do want to talk about how do you self-advocate when you're not in the room,
I have a lot of thoughts, and I would love to hear Dan's perspective because of the size of his organization and what he's dealing with. But self-advocacy it can really be, it can be more than just in the moment. It can be developed over time, and you really have to practice with somebody who, whether it's a colleague, a peer, a friend, a parent, a grandparent, but learn how to develop that muscle. And it can be very uncomfortable because you might trip over your own words, or you're worried that, you're asking for too much, or you're worried you might look whatever. Just do it. Thank you, Nike. Like, just try and practice, and then fill in your practice and integrate, practice, integrate, practice, integrate.
Right. Doesn't need to be, actually, I always say, if you're waiting for an annual review to advocate for yourself, it's kind of too late.
That's right.
And that's also very daunting, right? So it's really breaking it down. What are the small ways every day that I can find to advocate for myself?
And one other piece is know that you are a total bad ass. Like, have confidence and go into it with pure confidence. You are your own best person. You're amazing. Confidence, confidence, confidence.
The question that was asked earlier that I do want to throw to you, Dan, is this was said, usually the folks who, quote, have a seat at the table, meaning the ones who come into the office, are the ones that are remembered. How can folks who are working flexible schedules still maintain that visibility? And to add on to my question, how can the more remote folks maintain their importance / visibility when it comes time for promotions and raises? You addressed that a little bit with how Zillow's approaching it, but I think this is a big question for all of us. If it's just human nature, right? If I'm not in the room with you, then
totally
there's less visibility.
Totally. And it's not lost on me, the humor of Zoom cutting out on me while I was talking about the democracy of Zoom. But I think this is where organizations are going to really have to look themselves in the mirror, and we as employees are going to have to look ourselves in the mirror. Like I said to Claire, I'm more connected to my teenage daughter than I've been at any stage in her life, because I prioritized work. My wife has always had flexible work. So there's always been a gap there that has been lost in the last 18 months. I'm not giving that up. I'm not going back to the way that the world was. And if Zillow wants me to continue to be a part of Zillow is going to have to find a way to meet me there. Now, it is a little convenient when you're the architect of some of this stuff to have that opinion. But I would say the companies that don't recognize that one of the reasons we have all of the underrepresentation in corporate America that we do is because people have been structurally kept out of the room and not heard and not brought to the table. And I don't want to gloss over that, Zillow's waving this wand and we're fixing all of that. We believe we're on a better path to fix that in ways that that we and others couldn't see beyond the way the world was. And so I think that's where companies are really going to have to decide, do they just double down on going back to the traditional office culture, or do they find new ways to see and hear people? And then people are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to, I'll be honest, we also have employees who say, and have left Zillow saying, hey, I don't want to work on Zoom. I just want to be in an office. I won't get into maybe some of the demographics of those employees, but you can imagine the folks who really miss the office were the folks who were experienced the best of the office. And So, I don't know that I have great advice on how to change your company that way. What I would say is, I think you need to pay attention to, does your company care about changing? And does it matter to you that your company changes? And if those two things don't line up, that's where the great resignation will come into play, I think, for all of us. And just to add on to Faith's answer on how do you self-advocate, I also go back to self-advocacy is about a continuous dialogue. And it is about making sure that things don't bottle up and then explode out with this is what I want and it's the only thing that I'll accept. And trying to build the relationship and the trust back and forth with your manager, with your company, with your peers, to where you can make sort of safe steps in terms of advocating about a meeting, about an email, about a project, before you're feeling the need to go and self-advocate about your career and your progression and can I work remote or flexibly. And if you make those steps, you gain that confidence that I think Faith is talking about, and you're more likely to be well received than when, I can say sitting in the HR chair, when somebody comes in with their list of demands, because we haven't had that conversation and we haven't built up to really having that mutual trust where you can feel like you can be heard, but that you also understand the constraints of your company, your manager, your role, and how you can work with, how you can work within those.
I'm going to call out Lindsay because she repeated something, Dan, you said, but I do want to underscore it. Quote, the people who miss the office the most are probably the people who had the best experiences there. Yes, very true. Very true. And that it's good to want to hide, because then Tara said, or no, there was somebody else who said, Julie said, I miss the office and would love a hybrid environment. Right. Just one, I mean, we're at time. So maybe just, Faith, if you want to close this out with anything else you want people to know, any sort of advice, words of wisdom, resources you recommend, and then Dan will have you do that too.
Oh, that was so many things. I could take the next. So I think the future of work is love. I think that it transcends all strategies, and it really takes into the feeling and the awareness of why we're here as human beings. So that's what I think about the future of work, and that a workplace, everybody should have a workplace therapist. And part of what they do is also understand the organizational strategy. They understand the needs of you as a human. And then we blend it and we say, how do we support you in doing it yourself? Because we're here to empower and to advocate for, we're here to empower people so that this is a step in their self-actualization journey. And I do have tons of resources and books and practices. Feel free to email me or call me. It's on my website, and I'd be happy to talk to you guys and share more. But thank you. And I love all of you. Thank you for inviting me, Claire.
Thank you for being here. And Dan, any last words of wisdom, resources, etc., that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank you all. I know maybe there's a couple of Zillowites out there, but we've all worked through a society changing event over the last year and a half, and there's been a lot in that. And on behalf of your companies, whether they've thanked you or not, I want to thank you, because we've kept the economy going, and we have done a lot of really amazing things as people who have contributed to organizations. So I appreciate everybody who's worked so hard through the pandemic. The last piece that I'll just say to some of the questions and some of the awesome comments I've seen in chat, be good to yourselves is something I preach a lot to our employees, but also be good to your organization and try to get context before reaction. I do believe the vast majority of companies are really trying to institute change, are really trying to build a better future for all of us, and more importantly for our children that will be graduating into the workplace in the future. We've got to collaboratively do it together, and I totally acknowledge not every company does that part maybe well, but be good to yourself, be good to your organization, and I think you will find that you will mutually get to a better place. And that's certainly how how we try to approach things at Zillow. But certainly that's what I hope for all of you, as you spend time on this day and thinking about how you can grow yourself, your career, and your company, because we need you.
And somebody wants to apply for a job, just so you know, Dan. We've got, which I know
we are hiring. We are hiring.
And that is a great segue into our next panel, which is all about hiring. And I do want to just acknowledge one thing that Dan said about how, you know, companies, we need to like work with our companies and they do want to improve. I think in large part because that's how you retain great talent. That's how you attract great talent. To the point earlier at the way beginning of this conversation, that treating your employees well and making profit do not need to be at odds. In fact, if they are, that is a problem for the sustainability of the organization. So I love that we wrapped up the conversation that way. Thank you, Faith and Dan. In approximately 4 minutes, we are welcoming our next group of panelists. I can already see a few of them join. We've got Justin, we've got Christina. I'm going to just ask Tara and Eileen if you want to just direct message me and let me know that you are here. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and put up an interstitial so we can all take a bathroom break before the next great panel begins. And I saw we got some questions about hiring too. So keep asking those questions. Let me see. Hopefully that worked. Do you all see it? Do you see it in a big screen? Yeah, we good? Okay, awesome. All right, well, I'm going to stop this recording right now. For those, and that does not mean stopping the Zoom. So let me stop recording.